Now I will turn over the program to one of our council trustees, Robert Ruby. Robert has had a very distinguished journalistic career himself as foreign correspondent and as foreign editor for the Baltimore Sun. Robert, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here, both whether in person or on Zoom. I'm just going to start in by introducing the speakers. David Sauer at the end he joined the Washington Bureau of ZDF in the summer of 2024 as one of its 3 full-time correspondents in the United States. They cover political, economic, and social change in North America as well as Central America. ZDF is an independent, nonpartisan broadcaster. It's supported by monthly home charges. It has had the largest share of the German television audience each year for the last 13 years in a row. Jacob Fuglsang has been a reporter and very senior editor at the Danish newspaper Politiken for 25 years, including the last 2 in Washington. The news organization is for-profit. It is owned, however, by 2 nonprofit foundations. So Jacob, let me start with you. Earlier this week, the Danish Prime Minister gave an annual address to Parliament, a very formal address. Among other things, she said, quote, "No matter what happens, we support Greenland in determining its own future. We will not be threatened or intimidated into doing something that is obviously wrong." So we know what she's referring to, but Jacob, how do you translate the remarks by President Trump about Greenland for your audience? What does this mean for your readers?
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the invite. This location and the audience is humbling in every way, and it's a very good question. And actually, I think the question is so good that nobody has an answer in Denmark at this moment, and I don't either. But what the Danish I mean, I've of course been interviewing people here in the U.S. and in Denmark, and especially the Danish diplomacy. And what we're wondering about is what is actually Trump and the administration want that they can get now. Because if Trump said, and he says many times, it's about security, I can tell you that the Danish military, the Danish government would be very pleased to have all the kind of American security, even if you want the harbors and you want to secure the coastline. So if it's that, we can do something about that. Minerals, I mean, it's very complicated getting the minerals out of Greenland because of the climate and because of some a strong Greenland. Greenland has a strong wish of protecting nature, but it can be arranged, and if you got the money, then you can get all the minerals you want. So that's not it. So what's left? I mean, that's the wonder the Danish diplomacy is. So what is actually left? And that would leave you to some kind of imperialism. And if that's the case, then being a small state and being in the position that the Danish Prime Minister is, it's just about, there's nothing much we can do. So that's the rationale. That's actually what we are wondering about, is because everything the US wants is actually accessible already in the present construction. So I'm afraid I'm kind of help you in translating what Trump is doing on that place.
David, I think it was actually, according to my notes, a month ago today, the German chancellor, in talking with the Bundestag, said, quote, "The United States is reassessing its interests, and not just since yesterday. And so we in Europe must also adjust our interests without false nostalgia." So the analog to the question I asked Jacob, how do you translate for your viewers? How do you explain how the United States is changing?
Thanks for having me also, and thanks for the question. I also think this is a difficult one, even though I think it's obvious what Chancellor Merz is referring to. He's talking about Germany's and Europe's security with or without US protection. So for decades, Germany and Europe relied heavily on NATO and basically US role in NATO to provide security for Germany. And many German countries, European countries, haven't spent as much on their security and defense as many other presidents before wished for. Trump is the first one to really ramp up the rhetoric, and that has consequences, and I think that's a good thing. And I think most people in Germany also recognize that is a good thing. Even more so since Putin is aggressively also now threatening other European countries, not only Ukraine. And at the same time, I think the Chancellor has to kind of find a way to make things work now, because the situation in Germany is described by many people as kind of a last chance situation, because we have now a coalition that barely has a majority, and the AfD, which is a populist German far-right party, is gaining and gaining and growing. And that might be the last chance for the old parties to get their act together. So if they are not successful now, I think when we have the next election in 3.5 years, they might be the leading party, and they might be the party that has the next chancellor, with many implications to that. Yes. And maybe one addition to what you said, I think that was really interesting. That is not only the US president threatening another country, but also a NATO ally, which makes it all the more interesting. Yeah.
So you touch on something I'm wondering about, but let me start with you, David, on this. Tell us whether and how the American political right is influencing, in your case, the German political right. Are they learning lessons from each other? Who's the teacher? Who's the student?
Since I don't think the American right are the ones that invented things, I think somebody else, or many other examples, they are the teachers. I think the American right are also the students, and they listen carefully, and they do everything according to the playbook that worked over and over again in many other countries, in Russia, in Putin's Russia, in Hungary, in Orban's Hungary, in Turkey with Erdogan, and many other examples. But yes, you're right. Also, the German far-right populist parties, they listen carefully, they see things work the way they are done here now, and they adapt, and they are highly successful with it.
And Jacob in Denmark, similar story. And I'm also curious to know if it's reflected in changes in the media landscape.
I think it's a similar story. There is a lot of learning from Danish right wing, and of course, to many in the right wing all over Europe, Trump is an inspiration. But coming from a small country like Denmark, it's a little crazy to say Denmark first, because nobody's actually gonna think that's gonna do much to anything. But what you can actually see is that. And I think that's interesting, because I think that if you take more or less all over Europe, you would have more around 20-30% who would be in some kind of right coalition. So the thing about the US is the party structure has actually made that 20, maybe 25, maybe 30% being total in control, and which is a lesson to learn for European countries. And you see all around Europe that you try to make coalitions with different parties to kind of keep the right out of the government, and that's what there's some kind of successful in Denmark at this point.
And with the media landscape, are there, has it changed? Are there more outlets that are overtly partisan?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I would say it's kind of the same. It's been like for all the time I've been journalist, and you said that's quite a few years now. So no, I mean, no, I mean the right-wing news, and you could say even that Trump and the Trump administration had made the right-wing media in Denmark be a little less right-wing, actually, because it tends to show things we rather not try to duplicate in Denmark.
David, Germany has long been the most important economy within the European Union, one of the United States' most important trading partners, particularly on industrial goods. Germany really matters, not just in Europe, but it really matters to the United States as well. Talk to us a little bit about what access you and your ZDF colleagues have to administration officials. Can you, is it the same, it can be the same, the access is similar to what German reporters for German outlets have had under previous administrations? It's different in some way, it's better or worse?
It's worse, basically. So it's very hard to get officials, let alone a secretary, for an interview. There was something that was possible with the previous administration, also with Trump 1, but that's not possible for us anymore to get somebody on record talking to us from this administration. And I mean, all of you, I'm sure, followed also what, for example, the Pentagon is doing right now, that they ask reporters to have their information and their reporting kind of pre-authorized.
Censored is the word.
Exactly. And if you don't follow suit, you might lose your credentials. So yeah, that is censorship. So that makes it very hard for everybody to do their job here. And in addition to that, it's not only the officials. In my experience, it's very easy to get in touch with people, to talk to people. But the moment we ask somebody to talk in front of a camera, things are different because people are afraid. And that applies for everyday people, that also applies for university professors, that applies for business people, and so on. So things have changed. Yeah, it's more difficult.
In a phone conversation we had a few days ago, you mentioned something that seemed very unusual to me that occurred when the German Chancellor was here and was in the Oval Office, and the access that the White House, the decisions the White House made about who and what from the German press would be able to be in the Oval Office. Can you talk a little bit about what happened and why it matters?
Yes. Couple of the German correspondents that do have White House press passes, hard passes, that can go to the press briefings on a regular basis.
Including ZDF.
Including ZDF, did not get access to the Oval Office when the Chancellor was there. But then we, to our big surprise, for example, some of the new media from Germany, also the former editor-in-chief of Bild Zeitung, which is still Germany's leading newspaper. He was fired a couple of years ago, a different story, ugly story. But basically now he does a far-right podcast and TV show that is funded by a German billionaire. And this is maybe the most influential new media outlet in Germany. And he was allowed access to the White House, even though he usually doesn't even report on US matters. So that was very surprising to us. And a different story that I also would like to share is a couple weeks ago, my boss happened to be in the center of a big discussion, at least in Germany, because in a talk show at our station, he talked about Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff for the White House. And my boss said, and I 100% agree with that, that Stephen Miller's rhetoric reminds him of Third Reich rhetoric, at least for the, let's say, early 1930s in Germany. And that is a fact. You can compare the speeches, it's a fact. But basically that sparked such an outrage that the former American ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, he stumbled across what my boss said, and then he made a thread on Twitter and said this person should have his visa revoked. And the deputy secretary of state, so Marco Rubio's deputy, he also chimed in and said, yes, this is a radical leftist and his visa should be revoked, for simply pointing out that this rhetoric is ugly. So, and I think this, so as of now, he still has his visa, but we are very much prepared for him to have his visa revoked.
His wrongdoing consists of saying something that a powerful person did not like, as opposed to saying something that was untrue.
That is part of the usual playbook.
Let me mention something else that's come up, and it's thanks to David that I became aware of it. Jacob and I were talking about it a few minutes ago, and I'm going to ask you to explain why it matters. For many years, if you were, well, including today, if you're a correspondent for an overseas publication and you're accredited to work in the United States, you need a journalist visa. The term for the visas since time immemorial has been 5 years. You don't have to stay here for 5 years, but you can stay for 5, and then the authorities will, see if they want to extend that visa again. It means you can really get to know the country, you can develop sources, you can, more likely than not, be a better journalist. So Jacob, what's happening now?
What is happening now is that they're actually turning that into 8 months. It's not been through the Senate yet, but it's everybody expects it to be actually something that's a consequence. And it's not only that; it also raises the price dramatically, how much it's going to cost us as a newspaper. And we are, a newspaper. We might do it, but it's going to be complicated. And as you said, you need to do it every. For me coming here and get a visa for 5 years, it took, I think, 4 or 5 interviews at the American embassy in Copenhagen. So if you're going to do that, once a year or twice, every 8 months, it's going to be, there are going to be Danish publications who's not going to send anyone here because it's too expensive and because it's too complicated. And then you got the discussion about how it actually, the intimidation, does it work? And I'm pretty sure it's going to work on a long. I think some journalists are going to actually consider what they're writing if they are if they got their family here, if they got their kids going to school, they're going to consider it. And also, our sources in Denmark say when we do critical stuff about, for instance, the administration or something else, they say that you can actually risk being stopped at Dole Airport outside of Washington and then not be able to come in. It hasn't happened yet, and I don't think it's going to happen to my newspaper, but who knows when it's going to happen. Exactly, yeah. It might be a Spanish communist publication. At least that's what my sources say, but I don't know, and we'll see.
So Jacob, one more question for you right now. Denmark has been having to deal with the overflight of drones in the last couple of weeks. I don't think there's any doubt about the origin of the drones. They're Russian drones, testing defenses, who knows exactly what. Which makes me wonder how you explain, and I'll ask the same of David in a slightly different way, how do you explain American policy toward Ukraine and Russia to your readers? What would that story say? Here's what they're doing, and here's, to the best of our understanding, why they're doing it. What would those answers be?
It is a difficult explanation, as David said. I mean, I think that Denmark has been one of the most. Denmark and the U.S. has been very close allies for many years, and changing Danish governments has been very saying we need to follow the U.S. in whatever we've been doing. So it is a shock in that sense that at the same time that drones is passing over Denmark and other countries in Europe, I had to explain the readers that there are a meeting just close to Washington, D.C. and Virginia, where your discussion with officers are supposed to be less fat and trying to talk about that the focus will be some kind of internal enemy. It is a challenge, and I think that many Danish readers and the Danish government, for that matter, is still trying to comprehend what is happening in these years, for sure. At lower level, things are not as bad, but at high level, there are confusion, and I'm sure I get reactions from my readers saying, we actually don't know what's happening, because Denmark has been really relying on the US for so many years.
And David, Ukraine and Russia are no less central to German foreign policy as they are to Denmark's foreign policy. How do you explain American policy to your viewers? How does ZDF, as this nonpartisan outlet, explain, ladies and gentlemen, here's what's happening?
As I already tried to mention a couple of minutes ago, I think basically it's a good thing to have somebody really put on some pressure and to really make people understand, okay, it's a matter of basically life and death for many European countries. If they don't stand up to Russian aggression now, we know Putin is only going further and further and escalating things. So therefore, I think many people are kind of thankful for finally having found a way in Trump to raise awareness and to have all European countries step up and take care of their national security interests. But it's too quickly, because the speed, the pace that Trump applies to everything he does, the European countries cannot really, they cannot change as quickly as the US do. And therefore, I mean, German industry is in turmoil right now. The auto companies are in big trouble right now, and they are the backbone of Germany's economy. So I think most people in Germany would just wish for some more time to get things going and to take care of things themselves. And for the meantime, they would like to rely on the assurance that if fit hits the fan, the US are there to help out, and there's doubt if that's still the case. And even more so now, since France is also in turmoil right now politically. They might have their second prime minister in 10 days tomorrow. And Germany and France, I think, are the backbone of European stability. And I already outlined that Germany is on the brink of instability. France is too. Mm-hmm. France has a big problem with their debt. And things aren't looking that good right now.
So I have great news for you both.
Cool.
You're each going to get together, let's say, you'll get 30 minutes when you can choose with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, or the President, Donald Trump. You can have your camera crew and you can have a photographer. Why don't you, what do the two of you want to ask? You have 30 minutes on your own with him, or the two of you. Finally, you have the access. How do you want to use that time?
Well, I mean, my readers would, never forgive me if I didn't start out by asking, what the hell is he doing about Greenland? That would be my first question, and I would ask him because if he actually sends soldiers to Greenland, the soldiers he's going to meet is going to be American soldiers. So it's going to be an internal war, actually, what is happening. And that would be, if I don't ask that question, my readers will be furious about what I'm doing. So that would be and that would be what I would ask him about. But I think it's very interesting what David raises here. And I suppose that would be interesting asking Trump too. I think in 5 or 10 years, Europe will actually be stronger. And I'm afraid that the U.S., if what's going on now is gonna be weaker, and I think that actually, I personally think that it was a fair point to say that European countries need to pay their share of what is needed, and especially when Russia is so aggressive as we see now. So it's a good thing. I think actually Trump is helping out the European integration, which has been, as you know, David, a complicated matter for decades. So in that sense, he's doing a good job. So that's I think is going to be. But I think the thing I would ask about is also the way that Trump at this moment, and Hexet and Rubio, is putting pressure on the U.S. Army and putting away. I mean, all Europe has been looking to the U.S. because the military in Europe, U.S. is very strong, but it's also very non-partisan, which is a very important matter. And what they are actually doing now would be actually putting that under pressure at least, and maybe even at a risk that it's not going to stand.
Even though I probably wouldn't get a sufficient answer to that question, I would really like to know if he is acting in the way that he tries to do good to the country and to really act in the interest of the American people, or if it's more about making sure him and his family and his buddies and his friends are taken care of, and if he's looking to secure power beyond 2028. Because I think many things that are going on right now are clearly pointing to extending the Trump administration beyond 2028. He's making fun of it all the time, but I think he's serious about it, which would be another unconstitutional thing for him to do. And I think he already did many things that, in my point of view, violate the Constitution. And I would like to know if there's some kind of idea that he really wants to help the people and to make the country prosper, or if it's about his own interests. And then again, maybe it would be interesting to know when will all the things work out that he's putting into place? Since, I mean, the tariffs and stuff, so far it hasn't helped. But he promises that they will. I would like to know when they will.
Each other a question or two on, that's the only parameter, just to ask the question, and you can decide how to frame it and what it is. Two great correspondents for truly fabulous, serious outlets. I cannot emphasize that enough. So please.
Since I'm not an expert on Danish politics, but as far as I know, what Denmark has achieved, or Danish politics has achieved, is to, on the one hand, do progressive politics and at the same time be very strict on immigration. And I was wondering how that worked out, and if it worked out well, would that maybe be a blueprint also for the Democrats or whatever party in the US going forward?
Thank you, and that's an excellent question. And I actually, just before we started, I actually mentioned that where the Democrats are now, and as you guys know a lot more about that than I do, but where the Democrats are right now and what they need to do, they could at least, I think, draw some inspiration from the Danish Social Democratic Party, because they have been, in some ways, almost Trump-like, strict on crime, strict on immigration, strict on even, sending immigrants out of Denmark, which is not something we normally do. So they've been very strict there. And then on, the discussion about welfare society, about help to people in need, they've been very much, they have been like Bernie Sanders, if you're putting it into an American context. So I think actually that, and I suppose that's some of the discussions that the Democrats are have. I certainly hope so. And you could say that, as you read one of her speeches, the Danish Prime Minister, she's not very woke. So maybe there's something there too. And you could even say, actually, which is where, if I'm supposed to be a little critical about the government in Denmark, she is actually taking lessons from Trump in the sense of fear-mongering. There is a sense of fear-mongering. If she has one strong argument in everything she's doing, it's always a very, very dangerous world we're living in. Unfortunately, she's been right in the recent months. But anyway, still, it's kind of like making the political discussion in Denmark a little, sad, always to be fear-mongering instead of be visionary about what you actually want to do. At least that's my opinion. Anyway, I would like to ask you a question now that I've got the chance. And I'm not an expert in German policy either, but I would like to ask you, since Germany, the special thing about German history since the Second World War, you have an enormous amount of American troops in Germany at this point. I think is that 50,000 or something like that? Yeah, something about that. Is Germany actually ready if the present administration really do what they say they do and make America first and actually take these troops back to the US? Are you ready for that?
From a security standpoint, maybe yes. From an economic standpoint, probably no. So I think the way things are going right now, Germany is actually discussing about having mandatory military service again, which we got rid of a couple of years ago recently. So I did it, but then a couple of years after I did it, it was abolished and stuff. So I think they got it now, but the Bundeswehr, Germany's military, is ramping up, and they haven't found a way to really get production rolling for shells, for tanks, for artillery, it takes some time. So I think we could, Kaiserslautern or Stuttgart or Frankfurt, they could probably still be fine even if the 10,000 US troops in Kaiserslautern left. But could we afford it for a couple of years? I'm not sure about that. And even less since the German economy is not on a great path right now. Yeah.
Last question for me. I'd like to hear from each of you what you think your best story from the U.S. has been to date, and what story you would most like to do. We'll give you the resources. Don't worry about the editors in Germany or in Denmark. The resources will be there. But tell me, what's the best video you've cut here, the best article, and what's on top of your wish list?
Top of the wish list, Montana, Wyoming, maybe. Just go out countryside and just have a good time.
No. You have to actually file a story. I'm sorry.
Hiking, maybe.
Yeah.
I think a story that was really fun, even though it was still political, was we went to Utah a couple of weeks ago and did a story on how the funding cuts impact the National Park Service. And so we went to Canyonlands National Park and Arches National Park and talked to many, many people that are also dependent on the business that the parks provide there. That was, yes, it was a political story, but it didn't look like a political story because we went through the canyons on a boat on the Colorado River. So that was fun, even though it was serious. We already talked about that a couple of minutes ago before our event. Just before the election, a couple of weeks before the election, we rented an RV, and our idea was to travel through all the 7 swing states in 14 days. There was a documentary we edited after that aired just before the election. That was fun. We didn't have any pre-scheduled interviews or anything, so we just went through the country, talked to people, shot some interviews, and tried to get a feeling of how things were going and what are the issues at hand for this election. And that was really fun, even more so since I was just in the country for a couple of weeks when we did that. So that was my crash course to USA.
Thank you. I would like to actually end on an optimistic note in the sense that me and my colleague, a photographer, was doing the election campaign, and we were doing a lot of rallies. That's kind of part of the job. So we were standing in line with Trump supporters and Kamala Harris supporters at that time. And you get a little tired of this polarized world. So what we did was actually said we were in Pittsburgh, and we were lucky that there were American football match where they had this big tailgate party outside of the stadium. And I really loved to go around talking to people in this tailgate parties, but in the middle of the election campaign, these people were actually talking together, they were partying together, and we were lucky that we even found a couple where the man was supporting Trump, the woman was supporting Kamala Harris, and they were even supporting each team, 2 different teams. And I think that was an optimistic story that kind of showed the best of America. They were not married. I'm not sure they are today, but anyway. I think it's a show that was, and as I said to you, Robert, you were quite quiet in the telephone when I told you, but I'm still is optimistic that there's gonna be a strong counter reaction. The next generation is not going to, sit passive and look at what's happening now, and that you tend to, I believe in America, and I believe in the tailgate party. And if you go to Europe to a soccer game, you do know that the counter teams not always talk very well together, and they are certainly not partying together in Europe.
And they are certainly not married.
No, for sure. They will be divorced in no time. But anyway, so that would be my story, and the readers actually like that we kind of showed another picture of America in the middle of this very difficult time.
And your wish list story?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's. Well, actually, I think the wish list story is, and I don't think it's going to be a wish list. I actually think I'm going to do it. Because one group who is almost gone in the Danish news, in the American news media, and the European news media is actually the natives, the Native American who were here first. They are almost gone. So me and the photographer is considering going to the monument Crazy Horse. I've been there as a tourist and actually try to describe what's happening there, talk to the people, talk to their dreams, trying to make another history about the people who were there before the rest of us came here. I think that would be an interesting story. So I hope to do that this summer.
I just want to say I'm incredibly envious of the stories you've done and the stories you guys would like to do. Let me know if you need an assistant. I'm available. But for now, I think any questions? I know one of the staff members is taking things from Zoom. For the folks here, if you could come to the microphone, and I know there's some former journalists or active journalists here as well, and everyone's please welcome. We have 15, 20 minutes or so.
Hello. I like that both of your stories about liking reporting on politics were not actually interacting with politicians. That was really nice. When you got here, how were you impressed by the scale of America relative to your own countries? And how do you think that like the bigness of America, the spread outness of America influences the, way that things are unfolding?
I think that's a great question, also because of Danish readers tend to make, some kind of, they try to compare what's happening in Denmark with what's happening in the US, which is ridiculous because, the population of Denmark would be, something like Washington, D.C. or something like that. Actually, what I'm trying to tell the readers is that the US is a federation, and actually the US in big scale is doing what we are trying to do in Europe. And in that sense, you need to be realistic about what the democracy is actually capable of. Because if you ask someone from Denmark, someone from Germany about what's happening in the EU and how about the election there and who they're voting for, you won't get an answer. But if we go out and ask people, do you support Democrats or Republicans, we will get an answer. So in that sense, the American experiment is needed to be looked as an experiment and needed to be looked as an imperfect experiment, but still in a federation which is working closer together than we ever reached in Europe. So I think that's one aspect of your question.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's not only about the size, but about the diversity that the US has to offer. And people live in different realities. People live in different worlds in the US. Also in Germany, also in Europe, but maybe not to the extent that they do in the US. And I think, therefore, it's exactly right what you said. Yeah.
There is a funny story. When I was doing Trump and Biden, and I'm doing it alone because my colleagues in Denmark, they are gone to bed when it's actually happening. And then I was getting ready for doing what I needed to do. And then I saw how many at the New York Times was actually fact-checking the discussion. And I think, at least to my memory, that would be around 60 journalists. And then that makes you a little humble when you're sitting there alone at your desk trying to do what you do.
Other questions?
Both of your organizations are selling news to people back in your countries. And surely you get feedback from your readers and from your viewers. Is there a story that the feedback could be presented to Americans? Because right now it seems Trump is selling himself as being loved throughout the world. But maybe the story is different. And that different story is not coming across, I don't think. My friends abroad have a completely different story, which is not the same as Trump's. So I'm wondering whether you think bringing the news from Germany and Denmark back to the US is something that is worth telling.
I think it's worth telling. And if you're interested in how our viewers maybe see things, the videos and the documentaries and the pieces, also the news. So, I mean, we do daily reporting, live shots, live commentary and pieces for the daily news, but we also do documentaries we upload to YouTube, for example. And luckily, YouTube offers comments. And if you go through the comments on YouTube, you get a feeling of people are flabbergasted by what's going on, I can tell you, yeah.
We know that the stories that our readers are most engaged in are the stories where there are problems for Trump. We know that. We simply know that every time there's a problem for Trump, they are very interested in that. And the problem at this moment, I was at the UN Assembly just a few weeks ago, and I was actually sitting there when Trump was making his speech, and it made me think that in this global society, he is kind of like the awkward uncle every family has. Every family has an awkward uncle, but the problem here is that most families kind of like squeeze that uncle out and try to make the party go on without him, but we can't do that because the awkward uncle here in the US is also the rich uncle in the global sense. And you could see, which is strange being at the assembly, that you could see that he made this awkward speech. He was kind of like, yelling at all the things that the US has built up in the United Nations. And then people were I don't know if that's the right word, but they were brown-nosing all afternoon after he's made that speech. And that would be a paradox. And I think you're so right that someone needs to tell this administration the feeling they are really. I mean, you saw the same when Zelensky and the European leaders were around the table. You saw the same, that he was, But I also think that leaders in the world can't do much else. Because European leaders, as you said, David, maybe in 5, maybe in 10 years, Europe can stand on can be on its own, but not now. So you can't blame the European leaders that they're still trying to almost desperately keep US interested in the conflict with Ukraine, because if US is pulling out, we are having serious problems. So that's a paradox, but I think you're right. It would be good for someone to tell the administration what Europeans actually think about what's going on.
Let me add one thing, because I think it's very interesting that you mentioned when the Europeans came to the US or came to the White House to talk to Trump and Zelensky. I think there was a great example that showed that they all want to believe in what Trump says. They want it to be true, what he says. And if I remember correctly, during their meeting, Trump left the room to talk to Putin on the phone. Then he came back and then he told everybody, we agreed on a bilat between Putin and Zelensky, and after that we'll have a trilateral meeting between Trump and Zelensky and Putin. And everybody was applauding him. All the European leaders were happy with him for having facilitated this progress. That was obviously a lie.
Other questions?
Yes, hello. Someone on Zoom wanted to ask if a European country, especially a NATO member, determined that Trump was clinically insane and leading the country in like a rogue state, how would that change the way that the country did diplomacy with the United States versus now?
I actually think in some ways you guys have answered the question on, because you've talked about some people think of the situation as, well, we have a very wealthy, very powerful uncle who acts in unconventional ways, but there are limits to how we can and should respond to it. So I actually think we've dealt with that one. I don't think we need to go to mental health issues. Other questions?
Good evening, Jim. Based on our current president's, his behavior, and with the change of the U.S. stance and military, changing the DOD to the War Department, how he has directed the State Department and their actions with immigration, also with how our current president decided to have a conversation with the EU and also with NATO. Because of all the issues that are going on currently, as you mentioned, in Germany as well as in France, is there in your mind, a prediction 5-10 years that other countries that are currently keeping the U.S. at a arm's length may find themselves subjected to more of the same type of right-winged political theatrics that we currently are experiencing in the U.S. today? What are your readers, the feedback you're getting from your readers, that this may be something that they may be forced, the leaders of these states, to dive into? Thank you.
I think we are on that path. And this applies for pop culture and for music and for movies, but that also applies for politics. And I'm very sure that Germany and other European countries will just follow along the same path, but maybe they are 5 or 10 years behind. But the the role model that the US is for the whole world, or has been for a couple decades now, and still is for most of Europe, that is so strong, I think most European countries will just see and listen and learn and adapt and follow along the same path. Applies for the media, because what's happening to the media ecosystem in the US also works in Germany, same mechanisms. Applies for politics, and also probably applies to business, for science, everything, the whole picture.
I totally agree, and I would like to add that sometimes some of my own newspaper, some in the Danish discussion, is saying that there's going to be a division between Europe and the US, and I think that's right, but it doesn't, change the fact that the culture in the US and Europe is so similar. I mean, it's to me at least, it seems like there's so much European culture here, and there's certainly a lot of American culture in Europe, and you can't change that. So in the end, I think at least over maybe a decade or two, you're still gonna have this kind of strong cooperation between Europe and US. At least I think so.
Another question?
One more thing, maybe. I think there's only one role model you can follow, and you have, obviously at the moment, you have to decide if you follow the US or do you follow China and Russia, and then probably most still choose to follow the US.
So this is a question for each of you about the practice of journalism as you were describing it. So David, you said that you took your RV, you went to 7 swing states in 14 days. Looking back on that documentary, did you do a good job? Did you find that the US was trending toward Trump, or did you find just a lot of opinions?
I was surprised he won all the 7 swing states, so therefore you could say I did not do a great job, or maybe I didn't talk to the right people, but we certainly tried to. And we tried to talk to everyday people, and we tried to not only go to the big cities, but also go to the rural areas and talk to just normal people and just kind of get to know what's on their minds. I think we got a good idea of what was on people's minds and what were the crucial issues for this election. And we spent 3 days in Pennsylvania. And after that, even though it's just a tiny little excerpt and just a couple of people we talked to, I was pretty sure he's going to win Pennsylvania, which was telling probably. But yeah, what you are referring to is the dynamics and how things work. It's so complicated, and so dynamic right now, and things are moving so quickly, and it's very, very hard to keep pace and to really follow along.
I think a lot of people were surprised, including me. For Jacob, I would ask, so you have this first question about Greenland in your hypothetical interview with Trump, and he does the Trump thing of not answering the question and saying what he likes to say. How do you press him? As a journalist, what would your tactics or strategy be?
I'm actually, in that sense, relieved that I'm never gonna get an interview with Donald Trump, because I think his so impossible, and I actually think that my American colleagues is doing an excellent job, and I think they're trying. Not very successful, because he is kind of like, he is successfully putting his own agenda always on the air, and he's impossible, and he doesn't want to answer, and I think it's really difficult. It's like, trying to make soap stay in your hand when you have wet hands. It's kind of like that. And the first question you ask, I think it's such a good question about. And my only answer would be that I'm so glad I'm only supposed to report on what's actually happening. I'm very, very, because we saw it in 2016, and most people guessed wrong there. So I'm so glad I'm supposed to describe what's happening, not what's going to happen, because I wouldn't know. And the election this time was a perfect example of that. We do the same. We try to get out of the DC bubble. We try to go to Iowa, go to all kinds of states, because we need to be out where he's actually have some kind of success in getting the voters on his side.
I'm going to thank everyone who joined us this evening in person and on Zoom. But boy, oh boy, I really want to thank David and Jacob for finding time in incredibly busy, demanding schedules for joining us tonight. And let's please give them a round of applause and thanks.